Tea Palace, high above 2919 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show, coming to you live on Power Talk. Please go to our website, powertalk.live, download our free app, and stream all of our live local shows, including Solomon on Blast, the Jim Parisi Show, and yours truly, the Jake Feinberg Show. We can't thank you enough for making us part of your day today. During the holiday season, over this last month, I've had an opportunity to connect with one of the most decorated musicians and music writers in our country's history, and it's been an honor. He's become a big supporter of my show, and now I get a chance to interview him. Lee Underwood, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thank you so much, Jake. Appreciate it. Glad you have having me here.
It's great to have you, brother. I wanted you to talk about ultimately how involved you were with what's his name is Albert Huxley, Doors of Perception. Do you remember that book?
Yes.
Can you talk about how much you guys, as a collective group or yourself, how you sought out the truth?
The truth of what?
Your truth.
Well, the Doors of Perception, I guess, played a role. It came out actually before I met Tim. I don't know if he read it or not. I read it and was absolutely amazed that Aldous had such insight into the value and virtue and the power of LSD. Those doors of perception, they do open the doors of perception. LSD does. Tim, was very much involved with acid for a while, and with the whole hippie movement early on. It was the mid-'60s when he came to the fore. It was the mid-'60s when the Jefferson airplane had soared from the earth, when, the Grateful Dead was wailing out the full tilt boogie, acid slosh, rosy-cheeked, beamy-eyed baby boom children who had discovered nirvana in a pill. Love and a vision and community, harmony, personal freedom, and social cohesion in 2 tokes of red earth grass. Tim was very much a part of that early on.
Well, this interview is with Lee Underwood, so I'm just curious about if you could talk about because LSD was legal at that time. It was being made by the government. It was the purest form of LSD, and I wanted to know about a seminal moment that you had. It could have been with Tim using LSD.
Well, as a matter of fact, the best acid trip I ever took was that Tim gave me. It was Owsley Orange, and gave it to me at his house in Malibu, right there on the ocean. And it was fantastic. I had taken acid a couple of times before that, but nothing had happened. With the Owsley and Tim, everything opened up. And suddenly I came into that place of harmony, love, understanding, all the things that people had, that people talk about, and many people experienced during that time. That particular trip that we took at his house in Malibu was that for me. It was a very eye-opening thing because I had up to that point I came from the middle class, suit and tie life, straight life, go to school, get a job, and live your life in a conventional way. So I was kind of down on the middle class. I was rebelling against my parents and the whole society. And then that acid opened me up to compassion, love, understanding that everybody carries a heavy burden, whether they talk about it or not. Most people do talk about it. They kind of like to brag about it, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. But my sense of compassion emerged at that time. I didn't get deeply involved in taking acid from that point on. That was pretty much it for me. I took it a couple of other times, but it wasn't as potent, and I didn't really need it. So yeah, that was a turning point with me. It was on the day that Tim took the pictures for the album. Just a minute here, Blue Afternoon.
Wow, really?
Yeah, and he was stoned on mescaline, as I recall. And somebody knocked at the door, and Tim went and answered, and it was the photographer who had an appointment to take him out for a photo shoot. And so Tim smiled at me and waved goodbye and went out.
He melted away, yeah.
Yeah, he melted away into the ether and went down to the pier at Santa Monica Pier and took several pictures down there that appear on that album, Blue Afternoon. He was stoned out of his gourd, but able to function. This is one of the most amazing things. In my book about Tim, and the last chapter is about Jeff Buckley as well, but the main book is it's Blue Melody, Tim Buckley Remembered. I talk about that whole scene. And it was quite moving to me, that he came back and we continued, tripping. Finally left the house when we'd come down a little bit, went out to the beach at sunset. I remember just before we went to the beach, I looked in the mirror and had that sudden realization that I was a beautiful guy.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It wasn't just the way I looked. My physical appearance, it was the radiance that came from within. And that connection with myself was very important. I remember that to this day. Then we went down to the beach and we walked around in the early sunset part. It was great, beautiful sunset, quiet ocean waves. Those ocean waves, by the way, appear recorded live on the album called Happy Sad, a tune called Love from Room 109. And you can hear the waves lapping. Those were recorded on Tim's porch in Malibu, coming right under his porch, the way it does to this day. So that was a whole experience.
Yeah, no, I mean, Lee Underwood is already blowing our minds here. How much of Tim's mescaline LSD use, your experimentation, the band, did it come with the idea of exploring other multisensory existence in the sense of the natural sounds, incorporating natural sounds into your music, colors into your music, waves? To me, it's like you've already dropped two things where, there was photographs taken when he was on mescaline and then waves that were incorporated into an album. Can you talk about the multidimensional self and ultimately if you feel like the band's sound grew because of psychedelics?
I really can't say that. I don't know that that's true. Tim kind of went his way with the drugs and his inner experiences. I don't really recall his ever talking about the highs that he had, which is very interesting because I know that, when he would get high, he would play, and then out of that high state, he would create songs. And then he would just bring the songs to the rehearsal and lay them out, and we would work with them. I can't say for sure because that it came directly from an acid experience or a psychedelic experience. That was just a part of a whole.
Sure. No, I guess maybe that wasn't the best question to ask. To me, you're what you are saying though, in an organic way, he would be stoned out of his mind. He'd come up with some lyrics or a loose framework for a song, and then you guys would get into the studio and work that stuff out.
Well, we'd work out our parts for it. Mm-hmm. He usually came in with a completed song. In other words, he was not just a stoner sort of, coming up with stuff and letting it fly. He was a very conscientious songwriter as well as a conscientious performer. and went through, as maybe you know, many different stages that we can talk about along the way. Five different conceptual stages. So he was involved with creativity and the creative process from a very early time on. He knew he could sing. He was, let me read you a quote here that he told Frankie Nimco, journalist Frankie Nimco, in an unpublished interview. Tim said, "I was only about 12 years old, and I had probably 5 or 6 notes to my voice. I heard a recording of a trumpet player playing things way up there, so I tried to reach those notes. Little Richard got them. It was like a falsetto scream. I'd ride my bicycle around the neighborhood, screaming at the buses until I couldn't go any higher. Then one day I heard the opposite end, the baritone sax, way down low. I said to myself, there's got to be a way to do that. So I practiced, and I screamed, and I practiced some more until I finally ended up with my 5 to 5.5 octave range. That's a slight exaggeration. It's more like 3 octaves, but he was fond of saying 5 octaves. I tried to, I took the piano and looked at 5 octaves. It's just impossible. But certainly 3 octaves, and he had that, and that's the way he began singing. Then he got very much into the creative process of writing songs with his lifelong friend, and at that time high school mate, a friend, Larry Beckett. So Larry would write lyrics. Tim had this uncanny ability to take Larry's lyrics. At that time, it was almost all Larry's, and then come up with melodies and harmonies and songs out of the lyrics. It was an incredible talent. So anyway, the acid thing was really a way of exploring himself at that early stage during the hippie era before moving out of that and into other forms of, I'll call it intoxication, but it was creative intoxication. He didn't drink, for example, just to get drunk, or he didn't smoke pot just to get high. He used drugs and alcohol as tools for creativity. That's a lot different than, a lot of people who just get stoned for the sensation of it.
I mean, it's totally legitimate for creative expression and for consciousness raising. And I think it's,
yes.
I wanted to talk about some of the happy sad, for instance. You had you on percussion. I mean, you had keyboards. David Friedman played marimba, vibes. Carter Collins, congas. What was the concept Tim had not having a traditional trap set in his bands?
Well, I'm not sure. Probably because, drummers are quite often very flamboyant folks. and not all of them are all that great. I mean, they're still in the banging on the pots and pans stage, quite a few of them.
Well, some of that, but I'm just surprised. I mean, with your acumen, I mean, there were plenty of tasteful drummers too, though.
Yes. At that time, he just wanted it simple. Matter of fact, for a while, he toured just with Carter Collins on congas. Just Tim with his 12-string guitar and his voice and his songs, and Carter on congas. Then he brought me in, and the three of us toured. And I think it was just the lack of clutter that made it, a context in which Tim could keep his focus on himself, his melodic playing, his strumming, his making the rhythm himself without all the sonic boom, boom, boom and the cymbals and the raucous kind of thing that quite often goes on with drummers. As he evolved through these 5 different stages, from folk music into sort of folk rock, into jazz, into avant-garde stuff, and then finally into funk stuff, he would add drummers. Two of the best were Maury Baker. Maury Baker was a tremendous drummer. He played timpanis as well as, trap drums.
Wait, hold on. This is blowing. I did an interview with Maury a couple years ago. I had no idea he played trap drums on Buckley albums. Which albums were those?
Star Sailor in particular.
So tell me a little bit about talk about Maury's style, how it fit well.
Okay. Yeah, Maury played, as you know, he was a very versatile player. He's classically oriented, played with symphony orchestras, played with lots of jazz groups, I don't recall which ones, played with Tim. He was a very busy drummer. A lot of notes, a lot of fills, but always musical. He kept the tunes in mind and then would play almost as a soloist behind, in this case, Tim. I think if you listen to Star Sailor, particularly the track called Monterey, it features just Tim and Maury Baker. Maury Baker is one of the best drummers I've ever heard. He was very subtle and yet very busy, very musical, without being bombastic or self-indulgent. He served the music truly well, and one of the best drummers that I've ever heard Tim with. The other was Buddy Helm, who came in Tim's last group, where they were doing funk stuff. Dance music, white boy funk rock,
Right.
So that he needed Buddy Helm's kind of pop funk oriented sensibilities, as well as Buddy's high intelligence on the drums and his extraordinary technique. So, matter of fact, one of the last times I heard Tim, Buddy was on drums down at the Golden Bear in Huntington Beach, and they finished up the set with just Tim without his guitar and Buddy with his drums. And Tim singing, improvising, doing extraordinary vocal gymnastics, as the critics called it, going out there in an improvisational way with Buddy churning away behind him and following him very closely. Almost all of the musicians in Tim's bands really loved and respected Tim, and Buddy was one of the most loyal, I say followers of Tim or appreciators of Tim. So between Buddy Helm in the funk thing and then Maury Baker in the Star Sailor improvisational situation, those were two drummers that contributed a huge amount to Tim's performances.
I wanted to also ask you how much different were this, like a band like the Grateful Dead, you're never going to understand that group listening to their studio records. And I'm curious about the difference, if there was a lot of difference between the Buckley studio sessions and then how things might manifest in a live setting, especially if you got lost in an improvisational jam. How similar were the records to what your live performances?
Early on, we pretty much performed the songs the way they were on the records. In other words, a conventional approach to, performance.
Sure.
You make a record, and then you go in and you play the record, and you play the favorite songs that everybody first made love to, and they want to hear those songs just the way they do on the record. Tim got tired of that pretty quickly, and when he moved into the third album, which was Happy Sad, a jazz-oriented album, he was far away from the conventional blues-oriented sound that, say, the Grateful Dead had. They improvised, but within a pretty conventional framework, and with the blues as being the fundamental the foundation of it all. Tim got away from all of that and moved out of cliches and conventional song forms. The business people didn't like his stretching out, especially from Happy Sad on, because they wanted him to do it the way it is. On the one hand, you're supposed to grow and change, so you give people something new. On the other hand, the business says, no, don't grow and change. Stay the way you are. Find a hit and repeat it.
No, that's what I'm. So I mean, the promoters and people like that were being wanted Tim to be more conservative in the live context. Is that what?
Yes. After the second album. When Tim moved from Goodbye and Hello, which was the second album and a big hit, he moved into Happy Sad and got into his jazz influences. And that process of improvisation, and he started to develop confidence in himself. He also started to get into, a little later on, into real abstractions like Kathy Barbarian's singing with Luciano Barrios, electronic music.
Wow.
And once Tim had already been moving in those directions, stretching out a lot with this song called it's leaving me here. It'll come back to me in a second.
Yeah, no problem.
Basically something you can stretch out on, and he started really stretching out. And then when I played him Kathy Barbarian and Luciano Barrio, he didn't care for the electronic music so much. It didn't move his heart, he said. But he loved Kathy Barbarian's, who was gurgled and cluck and scream and whisper and do all kinds of nonverbal sounds. Within her, he found a friend. She sort of opened the door for him to really move into it. And that's when he did move into it and got into the stuff that finally appeared on Star Sailor. A concept that he developed over the course of 3 years, even though the record was a failure and nobody liked the music at the time, or very few.
I mean, it's a very... it's not hundreds of dollars, but it's like it's an expensive album now.
Well, yeah, but the thing I like about this is that in the time since he made that album, that came out in 1970, as I recall. People didn't like it then because they just wanted the voice to carry the lyrics. And they wanted to relate to the lyrics. Tim was out there screaming and hollering and carrying on and doing these so-called vocal gymnastics, and people just couldn't relate to it. They said, what is this guy doing? He's crazy. And the critics put him down, caterwauling, one guy called it. Michael Bourne, a very intelligent music journalist, gave it 5 stars and downbeat, but he was one of the few who understood the music at the time. Anyway, Tim continued working with the Star Sailor concept and for 3 years, and then he went into funk rock, the other extreme. Since that time, here's my point, audiences, listeners, have been inundated with all kinds of new sounds and new approaches to music. Their ears have become adjusted to strange and wonderful and new concepts in music, and they're more able to relate to something as extreme as Star Sailor was when it came out. Now, as I say, he developed that concept over the period of 3 years with Maury Baker on drums, Emma Chapman on his 9-string electric stick, which was brand new at the time, John Balkin on bass, who was very much involved in kind of arranging some of the stuff on Star Sailor in the studio. And who else was there? Glenn Ferris on trombone. These were musicians, all of whom I brought to Tim, and he liked them and brought him into the Star Sailor band. He developed that concept for 3 years but didn't record it, because nobody didn't have a label. He just developed it. They didn't want anything to do with it at the time. Now, people talk about Star Sailor with great praises. I mean, I get this stuff on Facebook all the time. People saying wonderful things about Star Sailor. I've never heard anything like it. How, my goodness, what a genius this guy was, which is true. He was a genius. So I'm happy to say that the audiences now are far more sophisticated and able to wrap their ears around something as extraordinary as the first Star Sailor effort, which was that recording. It was really just a beginning for Tim, and I'm sorry that more people weren't able to hear and appreciate the way he developed it over those 3 years following the release of the record.
Well, it sounds like the Jake Feinberg show. It might take root well after I'm gone. Here's the. Can you talk about how you connected with Paul Horn?
Yes. That was one of the very interesting periods in my life. After I played with Tim until around 1972. Then I got into my second love, which is writing. And I figured, okay, I can really teach myself how to write if I write about music and musicians. Right? So I combined my love of words with my love of music and became a music journalist. Paul Horn read one of my pieces in Pulse magazine and was getting ready to do his autobiography. His wife said, I want you to use this guy, Lee Underwood. He knows how to write. And he knows jazz, he knows music, you use him. So Paul called me and we got together. I would take a plane up to his house in not Vancouver, off the coast, Victoria. He had a big house right on the coastal line of the island of Victoria, overlooking, the ocean and the whales and all that. And we would talk. I would interview him. We talked not only about his being probably the founder of New Age music,
right,
which is what I was writing about at the time, and not only the founder of New Age music, but he came from a jazz background,
big time,
as well, so he could improvise. And we talked about his album Inside the Taj Mahal, for which he's famous, Inside the Great Pyramid, and his other Inside series. He would talk into a recorder. We had somebody else transcribe the interviews. I would go back down to L.A. and put the chapters together and send them to him. And then, I'd take another plane trip up until we finished the book. I was very happy to work with him. He's a wonderful guy, very intelligent, and with a broad background. His jazz orientation was terrific. His New Age stuff, was really good stuff at the time. And he was a likable guy, good sense of humor, and appreciated my writing. So, so we did that. Hardly anybody knows that I wrote that book, with Paul Horn. We co-wrote it.
What is, in my mind, there were two different types of jazz going on in the early 60s. You had kind of a modal, people would call it hate music. Some journalists, I hope I wouldn't have, but they called Coltrane's music hate music, but it was more visceral and clearly more, emotional. And then you had cats like Emil Richards going out to be with Paul Horn and Harry Parch and people like that who were creating the 43 tone octaves, and it was new music with new instruments. So they were expanding sonically. They were expanding sound.
Yes.
And I wanted you to kind of talk about that impact. How you all came down on it, the two different sides of it. And where Paul Horn came into that, because New Age music, that term is around now, but at the time in the 70s it was different. But to me, it goes back to this split in jazz in the 60s on both coasts, and I just wanted you to take us through that.
what can I say? My first interest was jazz back in the 50s. I was a kid, 15 years old, and I was absolutely entranced with the early work of Dave Brubeck, Lenny Tristano, those two.
Boyd Rayburn?
No, yeah. I'm not familiar with him.
Go ahead.
But Brubeck and Lenny Tristano, as well as several horn players, but those two guys on piano really blew me away. Then I got involved with jazz a lot. And then when Tim asked me after Goodbye and Hello, he said, "Okay, enough with this, rock stuff. Let's play me some music, all right?" So we listened to Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, Bill Evans, Nirvana, Intermodulation with guitarist Jim Hall.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was great. We also listened extensively to Thelonious Monk, Charlie Mingus, Jerry Mulligan, Gabor Szabo, Roland Kirk, who became one of his idols. Ornette Coleman, Milt Jackson. Now, there was a combination of 50s, 60s jazz with a kind of nod toward the more abstract things that, say, Charlie Mingus or Roland Kirk were into, exploring sound. Tim often referred to John Coltrane, but I don't know how much he actually listened to him, and I didn't listen to him at all at that time. Nothing against him, it just wasn't interested. Since then, I've become very interested in Coltrane and don't listen to him a lot, but I do check in. I've been going through Miles Davis stuff. I just recently read his autobiography, and listening to a lot of Coltrane now, and really checking into him and enjoying him, very much. But Tim, I think, used Coltrane as a kind of like a listening post, a kind of a milestone along the way that he didn't spend a lot of time with, but he was aware of Coltrane's experimentation and could relate to that.
Can you talk about the stuff that he could relate to, like the Intermodulation album? Like specifically, what were you guys getting off on with that? I love that album.
Yeah, me too. With Jim Hall. Well, he was getting off on the, Bill Evans. Well, he's an amazing piano player, as we all know.
Right.
He brought Ravel and Khachaturian into the world of jazz. He got put down quite a bit by black folks when Miles included him in his group. They said, "Oh, your energy level has gone down." Miles said, "Hey, man, you got to listen to what this guy's doing. He's introducing a whole new way of listening to music. Instead of, roar, 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 he gets into the subtleties and the harmonies and the beauty of it all. So check him out, And that's kind of what Tim was. He wasn't an educated musician. He was a natural musician. He had natural feel for music, for songwriting, and for sound, and for growth. The whole thing was growth, development, change, evolution, and moving into new things all the time. So along the way, Bill Evans, Nirvana, and Intermodulation, as well as Charlie Mingus was another guy that was moving into different sounds, along with Monk. Monk was playing a lot of space and odd chords, things like this. This was entrancing for Tim. All of these people were, because they were doing things in a different way. It wasn't just boogie, boogie, boogie on the blues.
Right.
This was miles removed from that, which set him outside the baby boomer culture. All right? I mean, everybody was hanging in there with, as he said at one point, he turned to me, he says, "Jazz, the rockers think it's cocktail music. Christ, they put a perfect pretty boy up there, spray him all over with glitter paint and makeup, plug his guitar into Hoover Dam, tell him to play the blues, man, and think they got reality."
What tune is that? That's lyrics from a song?
No, it's what he said to me.
It's a Buckleyism. No, I mean, that is classic. I mean, I mean, was it inspiring to listen to for Tim? I mean, do you believe that because he was so naturally gifted and was not academically trained, is that how you can be that sort of different organic style that Miles was going at is appealing to people that are just natural musicians? Do you think that people that are searching for difference, that's how and that's why it doesn't ultimately become popular music, because of the fact that it is very natural?
I don't know. I have to hesitate there. I think people listen for different reasons. I've got a great essay called Liberate Your Ears. It's on my site at leeunderwood.net. And it has to do with musical box thinking. Most people think in musical boxes. I like rock and roll. I don't care for country.
Right.
I like classical music, but I can't stand rap. Blah, blah, blah. On it goes. I love blues, but I don't care for, John Coltrane, etc. And Liberate Your Ears has to do not so much with the music, but with the listener, how the listener can open his or her ears and listen to the music in such a way that they discover, aha, that's what the musician, composer finds beautiful in this. And then, after that, decide whether or not you like it.
I dig.
But
But speaking to somebody who from my generation or younger, can you talk about some of the steps to get to that place?
Well, you have to be curious. I think curiosity, which is one of Tim's great qualities, is absolutely essential, and for me too. I get tired pretty quickly of, I saturate myself with a given concept. Like the jazz of the 50s and 60s. I love that. I saturated myself with that. And then I moved along and saturated myself with classical music. I'm now into Glenn Gould playing Bach and Beethoven, and I've got the whole spectrum at my, right there at my fingertips, and love it. When I change moods, I know right where to go to either change that mood if I want to or to expand it. Music is a great feast for me, a whole table full of goodies there. The natural thing kind of bothers me because, Miles studied music, for example. He was really into studying the horn with classical players. His main teacher, a guy named Buchanan, was a classical player, and Miles got thoroughly grounded in theory, harmony, etc., and then started moving into jazz away from white man's classical music, as he called it, because they weren't saying anything new to him. They were just playing old things, dead things that had already been done. He wanted to move into things that gave him expression and interested his extraordinary mind in new ways. Right? So he said, people put Ornette Coleman down. They say, well, he's a natural musician, he knows how to do it just on his own. Or they would put down Roland Kirk, as a novelty, right? He's just a novelty, man. He's playing three horns at once, and he's wearing his top hat, and he's just kind of crazy, and he's a novelty. Well, it's just not true. A first-rate musician. So some musicians are unschooled and natural players like Tim was, and managed to do it brilliantly because they're brilliant. Others, say like, I don't know if you remember a sort of a country rock player, Steve Miller.
Sure.
Miles really put Steve Miller down. He said, oh man, a poor fool, he can't play.
What did he mean by that?
Well, Miles was having to open for Steve Miller in one of his later periods. And Steve Miller was just a sort of a simple country rock guy who, just was a walking cliche, kind of fun, had a couple of pop tunes that were hits. But, you know, he was no John Coltrane, that's for sure, or Thelonious Monk or Miles Davis, or Tim Buckley for that matter. So, and Tim was kind of that way himself. Once he moved into a generic era, whether it's sort of the folk music of his first album or the folk rock of his second album or the jazz-oriented stuff of Happy Sad, once he moved into these things and explored them and felt good and recorded what he could, then he wanted to move on. It was all about change, all about evolutionary creative development.
Right, and now we're living in this time of such short-sightedness on all parts of it. It's all about bottom line, what can make the most money. There's nothing about change. Change is...
Agreed.
Is
the business doesn't want you to change, as we said earlier. They just want you to repeat the concepts you had in your earlier hit. And a lot of people are willing to do that because, you know, they get work and they make money, and it's understandable. But with a serious artist like Tim was, or Miles, or any of these people we've mentioned, you know, Thelonious, I mean, you got to go your own way. And that's what Tim was willing to do. And sometimes he had to walk in the rain, like with the Star Sailor period. Well, he was willing to do that.
Let's put in this piece of music here, and then we'll come back and break it down.
Sure.
On a mission given to me by Woody Shaw, Sunship, Disney. On the Jake Feinberg Show, brought to you by the Stereo Hospital, the Circle Tree Ranch, Abbott Taylor Jewelers, and Craig Pretzinger of Allstate Insurance, and we thank them for their support. Speaking in tongues there, Lee Underwood, I'm not sure, were you, I don't see you on the discography for Greetings from L.A. Were you on that album?
No, I wasn't. I love that album. It's a great album, isn't it?
It is so great.
This is, you heard Tim bringing in sort of some of the incredible, singing that he could make out of a simple one-chord thing or two chords.
Exactly.
It was extraordinary, that album, excuse me, Greetings from L.A., it kind of came and went because Tim had problems with every time he would develop an audience, whether it's from the first stage or the middle stage or whatever. He would develop an audience, explore the music, develop the audience, and then move on. So the audience that he developed would then put him down for moving on. Right? Yeah. So, they say when he got to the white boy punk rock dance music like that, Get on Top of Me, Woman, they said he sold out. It just wasn't true. It was a new source for him, a new source of creative energy, right? And that's one of my favorite tunes on there. There's several favorite tunes that I've got on that album. Move With Me, the opening tune, then Get on Top, that's one. One of his best songs is Sweet Surrender, a beautiful ballad that follows that. Then, of course, Nighthawk and Devil. I mean, he and Make It Right. He said, people like the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger, they sing about sex, but they're not really sexy. They don't get into it, right?
Right.
He said, I would like to get into the whole sexual trip. And he was recently married to Judy, a very sexy gal. And she was sort of the inspiration for that whole album. And it came out, I believe, in the mid-'70s.
Like 72, 73. Yeah.
72, somewhere in there. And the people who liked Star Sailor, for example, what are you doing playing rock and roll, man? Sellout. Well, it wasn't a sellout. It was a new source of inspiration for him, as was Judy. And that's one of his best albums. And I figured it should have been a hit then, but they didn't promote it. If they would, could be a hit now. A song like that, for example, could be a hit now if his estate would get him on the classic rock stations. I don't know why they don't promote it.
Lee, I wanted to just talk to you. I mean, so many. You look at guys like Michael Bloomfield, kind of wasting away towards the end. And what ate up Tim Buckley?
What ate him up?
Yeah.
Bitterness.
Was it bitterness in the idea that he was such a revolutionary and that the fact that he was changing the whole time and he could care less whether he had to create a whole new audience, and that's all people kept talking about was you're doing everything against the business model? I mean, was it just he could not really be a true artist? Yeah.
He told a writer named Bill Henderson, sometimes you're writing and you're just not going to fit in. But you do it because it's your heart and your soul, and you got to say it. It's the foremost thing in your mind. It's hard to play the kind of music that musicians like to play and the audiences like to hear too, right? And it is. It's very difficult. But he was willing, like I said, if you have to walk in the rain because you're following your heart and your soul in music, then you got to be willing to walk in the rain too. Well, he paid his dues with Star Sailor, and he was very bitter that nobody liked it, Star Sailor, except for the very conventional song he had written back in 1969 or earlier called Song to the Siren, which became a hit posthumously for him and is now known as really the hit song that he wrote. It's a very conventional tune. Great lyrics by Larry Beckett. Larry Beckett had a lot to do with Tim's success, and you got to give him credit for his writing. Tim wrote a lot of his own songs as well, but Larry Beckett wrote, many of Tim's songs. So Tim was bitter, man. He gave his heart and soul to this complicated, dynamic, extraordinarily complex Star Sailor music as it went along, right? It's kind of relatively simple on the record, and then he developed it further. And he was really bitter. And finally, man, he had no money, no manager, no record company. didn't know what to do. So he said, well, what can I do? And he said, I've explored all these things from conventional folk rock into the jazz thing, into my abstract avant-garde classical music thing with Star Sailor. That's what he called it, avant-garde classical music. What can I do? So that's when he shifted poles, right? Went down to Greetings from L.A., and found that, my goodness, it was relatively easy for him to write these really, upbeat rock and roll songs, the soul.
Well, I mean, honestly, that song we played, I remember my buddy and I sitting in the backyard smoking a joint, playing table tennis, and just, get on top of me, woman. It sounded like it sounds like that's what happens, I mean, that's what does happen. The authenticity of that cat was so deep. And Lee, we have to do a part 2. I mean, we barely scratched the surface, and I knew we'd be all over the place. But it's so great to connect with you, man. And I really, I think it's so cool that you've been able to move from just a tremendous amount of improvisational music into writing so effortlessly. And I think it's a testament to you. And I look forward to continuing our collaboration together.
Well, thank you so much, Jake. I really do appreciate it. I appreciate it because music, nature, love, and creativity have been my guides to this day. And to have you call and ask me a few questions about these areas really quite meaningful to me, and I greatly appreciate it. I'm 78 years old now and kind of last legging it, so this could easily be my last interview.
Well, no, it's not. We'll do one again.
Let's do it.
And I'm curious. Listening back at some point, let me know if there's any stuff that you talked about in this interview that you haven't talked about before. I'm curious about that. I always like to divulge new history, and I'll make sure to get you a copy of this as soon as possible.
Hey, wonderful, wonderful. And I hope you can maybe put out an excerpt or 2 on Facebook.
Oh, you better believe it. It's going to be we're going to blow this stuff out, man. Of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jake. Among other things, I greatly appreciate your appreciation of music in general, and in this case, Tim in particular.
Keep on rolling, baby. Talk to you soon,
All
man.
right.
All right. Later
Bye-bye.
on. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back with Blackbird McKnight on the Jake Feinberg Show.
Come on.